Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. So today I want to go over a buyer's guide for the Audi R8. Now if you're unfamiliar with our channel, behind me is my 2012 Audi R8. It's the V8 with the gated 6-speed manual transmission. This is my second Audi R8. So I did own a 2010 before this, very identical, just a different color and a few different options. But this is a fun car. As you can tell, being my second one, I've had this particular model just over 3 years now. I have no plans on selling this car because of how fun it is. So it's a vehicle that I highly recommend. So if you're in the market for an Audi R8, there are 2 different generations. We'll go over all that information, and hopefully this can give you a better buyer's guide and all the information that you need to know if you are searching for this amazing supercar. So let's start off with a little bit of history about the Audi R8. If you're unfamiliar with this car, this is a 2-doored, 2-seater mid-engine vehicle. It's all-wheel drive. You could classify this as a sports car or a supercar. It has this supercar exterior styling and uniqueness, but with the V8 engine, a little bit more of a sports car. If you go with the larger engine, you could classify that more as a supercar. To me, this is a supercar on that sports car budget because it kind of has a blend between the two. Now, this was designed, developed, and manufactured by Audi's private subsidiary company, Audi Sport GmbH. Now, I searched the entire internet. I could not find what those letters stand for. Audi is a German company, so I'm not sure if their German translations to English kind of match up with that. But anyway, basically that was where Audi did a lot of their high performance vehicles. So they had the exclusivity, the customization, and the transformation capability from Audi Sport. So this is where all the sport models were basically developed, the S line, the RS line, and of course the R8. And a really cool fact with the Audi R8 is the fact that this is actually based off of the Lamborghini Gallardo. So that vehicle was introduced in 2003. These cars are nearly identical. My brother owns a 2014 Lamborghini Gallardo, and with them side by side, we basically have exterior shells that are different. Everything underneath is nearly identical. As far as the suspension, a lot of the components, transmissions even, are very similar since Audi and Lamborghini are owned together. Very cool to see that we basically have the same car. I'm driving around a Lamborghini with an R8 shell on it. And then the first generation for the Audi R8 ran from 2007 until 2015. It actually first made its appearance in 2003, and then the road car was launched in 2006. Now in the USA market, we did not receive the Audi R8 until 2008. So that is the first model year for the USA for the first generation. And during the first year of production, 2013 was actually the only year that was not produced for the USA market. In Europe and other countries, they have 2013s. In the USA, we do not have a 2013, which is interesting to see. But Audi also wanted to kind of slow production, stop it to gear up for their facelift. So in 2014, there was a major facelift for the Audi R8 before it was ended in 2015. The Audi R8 was the first vehicle to introduce daytime running lights. So you'll notice those in the lower section of the headlights. I drive around with them on all of the time because I personally like the look. Even though I'm behind the wheel of the driver's seat, it gives it a really cool look with those. So in all the vehicles that now have DRLs, you can thank Audi for putting them in the Audi R8. So now let's move on to what powers the Audi R8. So there's 2 different engine options. This vehicle right here has the 4.2 liter naturally aspirated V8. It was actually pulled from the Audi RS4. That is a vehicle that is no longer available for the USA market, but I have been able to drive that car. 2 transmissions were available for the RS4, and they carried that to the Audi R8, where we have 2 transmission options as well. You can get an automatic or that 6-speed gated manual transmission. RS4 is a fun car. It's a little bit slower, obviously being a sedan versus a 2-doored sports car, so this is quicker, but that is where they pulled the engine. So Audi utilized what they already had. And then in 2010, Audi introduced a V10 option. You could get a 5.2 liter naturally aspirated V10, which was actually pulled from the 2nd generation Lamborghini Gallardo, which came out in 2008. The 1st generation Gallardos actually had a 5 liter naturally aspirated V10. So they bumped it up to a 5.2 liter, put that in the R8, and now you could get a V10 with the R8 platform. Now you could also get a coupe or convertible. Of course, I have the coupe behind me where you can see a lot more of the engine. I do like the styling of the coupe better, but you could get a convertible, and Audi introduced that in late 2010, early 2011. And then in 2012, which is my car, there was a slight redesign, not as crazy as the facelift that I mentioned earlier for 2014. So really there's not too many differences, but we do have some interior differences where all the lighting went from red to white. So some minor adjustments like that. And now that leads us on to the second generation for the Audi R8. I have been able to drive the second generation. It went from 2017 until present, 2024. Now, interestingly enough, there's no 2016 for the first or the second generation, so that was a year skipped. It was introduced though in 2016 for the USA market, and in 2015, the European market was able to get the second generation. So again, a little bit behind for the USA market. So 16 and 19 were the 2 years actually that were skipped for the second generation. Now you could get a coupe, a convertible. There was also a rear wheel series, which meant rear wheel drive. So in 2018, Audi actually decided to make a rear wheel drive version of the R8. In its entire lifetime, Quattro all-wheel drive was the only drivetrain for this. For 2018 with the rear wheel drive, it also cost about $40,000 less than going with all-wheel drive. So if you wanted to get into an R8 and you didn't want to spend that extra money just to get power to the front wheels, you could go with the RWS, which rear wheel series, of course, which is where I mimic this red stripe from. So just to throw that out there, I wanted to mimic that since I thought it was a really cool design. That's how you can tell most of those have that stripe. I believe it is an option, but a lot of them do. There's also a GT model, a GT Plus model too. A lot more was available versus the first generation. We really didn't have any other options. It was kind of, you got a base model, you put the options you want on it. There weren't any different trim levels like the GT or the Performance, things like that. Now the second generation also ditched the manual transmission, so kind of sad to see that go. A second gen with a gated manual would be amazing to see. So no manual, but 2020 was a refresh, basically a mid-cycle refresh, where there was an increase in horsepower. The V10 Plus was also renamed V10 Performance Quattro. So it had a lot more power, and they just changed it up so that way you were able to tell. So let's circle back to the engines now, because I didn't talk about any of the horsepower, but now we can talk about the first and second generation and how the power has increased over the years. So with the 4.2 liter V8, which is in my car, that was rated at 430 horsepower, 317 pound-feet of torque. Then you bump up to the 5.2 liter NA V10 with 532 horsepower, 398 pound-feet of torque. The Plus model increased that to 601 and 413, and then the Performance bumped that up to 612 horsepower. And then Audi also made a limited run at a 2023 R8 GT. They made 333 units to keep this a very low production vehicle. That had the max, 620 horsepower for that model. So we have a significant difference. Even with the base engine, the lowest power, this is still a fun car to drive, as you'll see once we get it out on the road here. And so now let's move on to the MSRPs for the Audi R8. So back in 2008 for the USA market, you could get an Audi R8 V8 with a base price of $109,000. Now, I do actually have the original window sticker to my first Audi R8. I don't have it for this one, but my 2010, which was very identical to this, it had a few options to it that this car does not have. But the MSRP for my 2010 was $134,000. So it was well equipped with the options that you could put on it at the time. For the V10, they had a starting MSRP of $146,000. So right off the bat, even with a fully loaded V8, you still had to spend about 10 grand more for a base V10. So it was a significant difference. Even now, there's a huge price discrepancy between a manual V8 and a manual V10. We're talking two of my cars if you want to get a manual V10. So they have appreciated. V8s have still held their value incredibly well too. And then on the used market, you can find these anywhere between $60,000 and $200,000, depending on mileage, first, second generation, of course. You can find some automatic first gens for closer to that $60,000, and then the $200,000 is going to be fairly new second gen V10s. And of course, with their different options and availability, even the limited GT model, that price could be more than $200,000, but there's a huge range. You can still get a lot of R8s for well under 6 figures. The biggest thing that I want to talk about now is the reliability, any recalls, maintenance, insurance, all of that back-end stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about or know unless you owned one of these cars, of course. For any of the recalls, I'll start off with the first generation. The only thing that I could find was there was an EPA emissions recall where dealers just had to do some kind of tuning, software update, something like that, for the EPA emissions. So I wouldn't really call that a recall necessarily. I've never had any letters on either of my two first generation R8s. So I'm not sure if that was in different markets. I couldn't find anything about that, but as far as a recall goes, I wouldn't really call that one. And then for the second generation, there was insufficient oil to the gearbox. That didn't affect every model. I couldn't find how the solution was to fix that, but honestly doesn't sound all that bad. I've seen some other brands that have had similar issues where it's a really easy fix to either replace a seal, O-ring, some kind of internal component that you can easily fix. But that's it. For this car, there's really nothing unreliable about these vehicles. I have seen an Audi R8 V8 with 150,000 miles on it that did need a new engine. So it lasted 150,000. I'm at 34, so I've got a long way to go. And of course, that can just depend on how it was driven and maintenance, things like that. But getting to 150,000 doesn't seem all that bad. Obviously, there's other brands that can go 300,000–400,000 miles, but for a supercar, that's not all that bad. And so basically that means that I really don't have any plans on selling my car, because with the miles that I put on it, I'm going to have this. I may not even have to put a new engine in it with the driving that I do. I try to drive it a lot, but it's going to be something that will be very reliable. But with that being said, let's talk about cost of maintenance and insurance, because I have had some issues arise, but nothing major. On my first Audi R8, I did have a front brake caliper that needed to be replaced. Now, I had some of that covered under the warranty that I had when I bought the vehicle, but the brake caliper from Audi itself was about $1,400. That is a lot of money for one component, but these are 8-piston brake calipers up front. So it's a large brake caliper, and there's going to be an added cost for that. And then I did have the AC go out in the car that you see behind me. I made a full video on doing that myself in the garage, because Audi was going to charge me between $5,000 and $8,000 to do this project. I did it for $1,200 in my garage. It took 3 days to do. And I think the reason that that's a known issue to go out is because it's buried underneath the engine, where it just gets blasted with heat. So kind of a poor design on where it is. It's very hard to get to. But that is something that you can tackle yourself. In 3 days, I got it done, got the AC recharged, and I have been good ever since. Now, ironically, that's not the first time the AC has been replaced in this car that you see behind me. In my first R8, it was never replaced. But after doing some research and with my local Audi dealer, technically this car is now on its 3rd AC unit. So hopefully I can go another 5, 6, 7 years before I have to do it again, but I know how to do it, and that shouldn't be all that hard to do it again. Now, the last major issue with the Audi R8s is the magnetic ride suspension. In my first R8, no problems. In this car, I had the front suspension starting to leak. So I did replace the suspension. Audi charges you $10,000 to replace it with the factory OEM suspension. I spent $1,400 on a coilover kit to not only lower the vehicle too, but of course not to spend 10 grand just on factory suspension. It's not something I ever used either. It made it go from soft to stiff, of course, but I have like 15 different settings in the suspension. I do have to do it manually if I want to adjust it, but for 1,400 bucks, it handles a lot better than that magnetic ride suspension. That's it though. So honestly, when you add that up, 1,400 plus 1,100 plus 1,400 in the past for my other vehicle, not all that bad for a vehicle of this performance level and of course for its cost. Now, let's talk about insurance, because this is a huge thing that on all the vehicles that my brother and I buy and own, we talk about insurance all the time, because a lot of people think that you have to be some multi-millionaire to drive around cars like this. Now, obviously, being a $70,000, $80,000 car, a lot of people actually drive those. When you look at giant SUVs, there's cars out there that are brand new that cost more than this car does, even though this is much older, of course. There's vehicles that people are driving around you don't even blink your eye to, that's an $80,000 Cadillac or something like that, that you just wouldn't really know is that expensive. For my Audi R8, I pay $93.52 a month for my insurance. That's $1,100 a year for this car, and it's cheaper than my GR86 by $71. So even my 2023 Toyota GR86 costs more to insure than this Audi R8 here. So honestly, it's not all that bad to keep this out on the road. And as far as registration, things like that go, for my state, it's about $400 a year, which is an added cost that, you know, is just part of owning the car. So before we get the Audi R8 out on the road, let's just take a look at some of the features that this car does have, because this is a vehicle that you can actually daily drive. We have that storage space up front with the button on the key fob, so it makes it a lot more practical. I've been able to take this grocery shopping, put a lot of items up front. And so just having that extra room makes it a lot more daily driver friendly as far as the items that you can put in it. Of course, it's lowered. I have an aftermarket set of wheels, and I've even painted the calipers red. A lot of R8s for the first gens came with black calipers. I need to recoat them. I have some other options that I'd like to do, but I think the red just makes it pop a lot more, especially with that stripe. And then I have a larger set of exhaust tips with that aftermarket system. And for the exterior, there really wasn't a whole lot of options. You had 3 options for the iconic side blades, however. You could go body colored, silver, or you could go with the carbon fiber, which this model has, of course. And then for the interior, this is where a lot of the options were a little bit different. So for this model, we have carbon fiber, we have the leather, of course. Leather, the extended leather package for the entire dash and upper section here was an option that this car does not have. So it goes from leather to whatever this material is here. Not a big deal for me. My last car was full leather, but my other car didn't have the Alcantara headliner. So we have that for this particular model. You could get navigation, which I do have in this. And other than that, it was, well, I guess you had the Bang & Olufsen sound system, which was an option too. And then you even have a little bit of storage behind the seats here. You can see my aftermarket fire extinguisher, which is always very helpful. But now let's talk about the starting process. This is like being in a fighter jet. Usually I have the mirrors folded in. So when I hop into the car, turn on the electronics, make sure everything is going, get those iconic DRLs on, fold the mirrors out, let it kind of wake up a little bit, and then we can fire it up and we're good to go. So it's always an experience getting into this car. It's not just push the start button and you're ready to go. It's, at least with how I have it set up, that is my starting process. And it's just a fun car. So how do you know you're in the market for a vehicle like this? Well, there's a lot of different options that you can go with at this price point. So with my 2012, I bought it with around 20,000 miles on it, and it was about $80,000. Let's give it some gas here because we got a fun road. And obviously the exhaust wakes it up a lot more. The stock R8 is like a vacuum cleaner. Audi didn't put a sport exhaust or anything like that on it at the time. So in the stock form, you can barely hear it. But I have the valves open now for my aftermarket exhaust, and I think it sounds really good. But going back to how do you know you're in the market for a vehicle like this? Well, an interesting fact about my first R8 is that I actually sold it to buy the Corvette C8, which was the first mid-engine Corvette ever made, of course, and I thought that was going to be a really cool mid-engine, exotic, sort of, American of course, but having that exotic look with the mid-engine design. Only flaw with that car is that they ditched the manual transmission. So after 60 some years of the Corvette having the manual, the C8 was only a paddle shifter vehicle. And I was able to drive that car a lot, but it just didn't give me the same character that this R8 does. It's a lot more modern, of course, it has a lot more technology. That's not something I'm interested in, really. I don't even have touch screen on this, so it's really just good for listening to my phone. I can listen to my audio via Bluetooth with this because I have an adapter for it. But this is just you in the car. You have the manual, which I think is a lot fun, but sometimes you mess up like that. But that's just one example. I sold it for the C8. I didn't really like that car, so I had to get back into another R8. But there's also Porsche models that you can get. You can get a GTR, M4. There's a lot of cars in this price point, just depending on what you want out of your car. And so it's not that much more expensive than any of those cars. We're kind of in the same ballpark with cars that cost, let's say, 60,000 to the high 90s. Some of them will break six figures, of course, just depending on the newer models that you get, lower mileage, things like that. But let's say we're in the good let's go $70,000 to $90,000 for a sports car. There's a lot of options. You have the F-Type. You even have some Lotuses too, if you want a little bit more exclusivity. But with the R8 here, it's such a blast. I really don't have any negatives to say about the car, and I'm not trying to be biased just because I own it. There's a reason that I bought two, because if I tried to make a 5 things I hate about the Lambo, I guess the only thing that I don't like about it would be that you have to reach for your key fob to unlock the door in order to open it. It just doesn't unlock when you walk up to it like modern vehicles. And obviously, even the newer ones, you can do that with the electronic button that they have. But just the driving characteristics of this car, it's not the fastest car out there, but boy, is it fun to drive. It weighs just over 3,000 pounds, so it handles well for its weight. I could see it needing a little bit more power, but it's a lot of fun to drive. So if you want more of that raw feeling experience in an old school car like this, it's still going to be something that is a lot of fun to drive. And it's one that, with the manual, especially with the gated's easy to drive. And I guess this guy's letting us over. Well, that's cool. Thank you, buddy. All right. The gated manual is a lot of fun to drive. It is a lot better than, you know, just a normal shifter that you can't see, of course. But a lot of people think it's hard to drive, and that's not the case. It is so engaging and so much fun to drive. But one thing I like about this car too, and really this is with any manual, this car doesn't have anything to rev match. So you have to rev match yourself. And obviously that's a technique that you learn how to do over time. But it's just another thing that I personally like about just having to do everything yourself. We have traction control for this, which I can turn off if I want to. There's not enough power with the all-wheel drive system. You can't brake traction. It's really impossible to get sideways in this car. So it provides you with a lot of usable power and a lot of great handling characteristics. So it's a car that it's a lot of fun to drive. It's also something that you can daily drive. When I had my other car, I don't drive this one quite as much, but I definitely tried to daily drive my other car. I try to drive this as much as I can, but it is a car that you can daily drive. It's super comfortable, and it's very, very nice. One thing also that I've been trying to learn with this car, since it doesn't have active rev matching, just to throw this out there, I saw a video where this guy was in a Chevrolet Camaro, and a lot of newer cars like that have active rev matching. So he put his foot on the clutch, and he went from 6th to 5th to 4th, and then let the clutch out on the gas. Because the vehicle automatically rev matched those gears, he was able to row through it very quickly. I've been trying to do that by doing that all the way down to 3rd. Now that wasn't quite as pretty, but like even something like that, I just started trying to do in the last 2 weeks here, just to be able to do that. If I needed to downshift to pass someone on the highway or something, it's a lot cooler than going into each individual gear. And then let's get out and merge real quick. We have a little bit more potential than that, but it's just so much fun. Even that, you know, getting up to 5,000, 6,000, somewhere where I was there. It's not slow, but it's, you know, it has a healthy amount of power to get up and move. So it's an amazing car. It's why I've bought 2 of them, and this one I don't see selling. With how manuals are going away, you know, a lot more people don't even want to drive. I watched a video the other day about 15, 16-year-olds not even hurting to get not even wanting to get their license because they would rather stare at their phones than, you know, have a car to drive. So, I mean, everyone's different, of course, but I have no plans on selling this just because it's getting more rare. You're not going to be able to find them at some point because no one's going to want to sell theirs for the people that, you know, the true car enthusiasts that want to have some fun. So If you can find one, get one now before they are no longer available. But the Audi R8, true iconic car. This is something, when Iron Man came out, was basically the reason that I wanted this car. I saw that in that movie, and ever since, it was a dream to make that a reality. And here we go with the R8. So I highly recommend it. It's something that I'm really one of one in the area that I live. I hardly ever see first gen R8s around. I see a lot more second gens. They seem to be way more popular. They're a lot more expensive too, but a lot of people like the body style of the first gen here. I do like some of the angles on the second gen. Facelift, if I could get a 2014 manual, I would. I like the styling and design elements of that car, but it's definitely a sweet car. So if you're in the market for something around that price point, definitely consider an Audi R8. But that is going to wrap it up for the buyer's guide on the R8. And as we have some police over there, let's put it into the basically stock form, which is another reason that I like the exhaust. I don't have to be the loudest car. With an acceleration here, I can still have some fun and not be loud. But that's going to wrap it up for today's video. Give it a huge thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Consider smashing that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our daily uploads. I will see you all in the next video.